Marco, after 22 years of dedicated service to this company, the time has come for us to go our separate ways. The words came out of Brenda Morrison's mouth as if she were firing a maid who had broken the good china. I sat there in the conference room, staring at my boss's wife, who had decided, out of the blue, that she had the authority to fire me. She didn't even work for the company. Brenda was just the CEO's rich wife, a former model who showed up at the office from time to time wearing handbags that cost more than my monthly salary. I understand that this may be difficult to accept, she continued, adjusting her platinum blonde hair, but your energy is simply no longer in line with the new direction of the company. My energy. 22 years building that company from a startup operating out of a basement, and my energy was the problem. My name is Marco Silva, I'm 51 years old, and I just found out that dedicating more than 2 decades of my life to a company is worthless when the rich princess decides she doesn't like your face. The worst part wasn't even the firing itself. It was the way it was done. Richard Morrison, my boss for all these years, didn't even have the courage to show up. He sent his wife to do the dirty work while he was in an important meeting. What meeting? Probably playing golf with his partners. We've prepared a generous severance package, Brenda said, pushing a folder toward me. 3 months' salary and continued health insurance for 60 days. Generous. 22 years of sweat, blood, and lost nights, and they thought 3 months' salary was generous. I remember when Richard called me in 2002, desperate. The company was going bankrupt, with no credit and no headquarters. Marco, you're the only one who can save us. I need you to sign the lease for the new office. My name is tarnished in the market. And I signed. I put my name, my social security number, my credibility on the line to save his company. I never regretted it. Until today. We'll need you to return your badge and keys today, she added, checking her perfect nails. The keys. If she only knew what those keys represented. They weren't just pieces of metal that opened doors. They were access to 22 years of memories, achievements, and above all responsibilities that no one else in that company understood. Sure, I replied, keeping my voice calm. Just one question, Brenda. Does Richard know you're doing this? She smiled, the way rich women smile when they think they're untouchable. It was his idea, Marco. He just didn't want to hurt you personally. He thought it would be better if I broke the news. Bullshit. I'd known Richard long enough to know when someone was making things up about him. But I let it go. For now. I took my badge out of my pocket and placed it on the table. Then I took the bunch of keys and left it beside it. 11 keys, each labeled with my handwriting, each representing a part of that building I knew better than my own home. Perfect, she said, quickly gathering everything up. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings. I stood up, picked up my briefcase without opening it, and headed for the door. I stopped at the threshold and turned around. Brenda, can I give you some advice? She raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow. Next time you want to fire someone, maybe you should check who really runs the company. I left before she could respond. In the hallways, employees lowered their heads, pretending to be busy. Some had known me since they started as interns. Others had grown professionally under my supervision. None had the courage to speak to me. In the elevator, alone, I opened the folder for the first time. There it was, Marco Silva, fired for organizational restructuring. They didn't even have the honesty to admit that it was on the whim of a spoiled woman. But there was something Brenda Morrison didn't know. Something even Richard didn't know, because in recent years he had spent more time on the golf course than in the office. The lease was still in my name. All these years, every renewal, every negotiation, everything went through me. And in the rush of the last few months, with Richard focused on impressing investors and Brenda spending money on image consulting, no one paid attention to details. Details like the fact that the lease expired 3 days ago. And no one renewed it. If you're enjoying this story of an underappreciated employee who's about to teach arrogant bosses a lesson in humility, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how this revenge will unfold. Because while Brenda Morrison thought she had just gotten rid of a problem, she had actually just awakened something much worse. And now, I had 48 hours to decide what to do with this information. I drove for 20 minutes before pulling into an empty parking lot near the river. I needed to process what had just happened. 22 years. Over 8,000 days of waking up early to build something I thought was mine too. Brenda Morrison. The woman who had ruined me had come into Richard's life just 3 years ago, when he was still divorcing his first wife. I met that bitch at a company Christmas party, all decked out in a dress that cost more than a secretary's annual salary. She didn't work. She hadn't worked a day in her life. The daughter of a Miami businessman who went broke in the 90s, she married Richard for money and status. And now she had decided to play executive with the company I helped build brick by brick. The worst part was how she talked to me during her sporadic appearances at the office. "Marco, dear, could you bring me a cup of coffee?" As if I were her personal assistant. Or, "Marco, this air conditioner is too strong, can you fix it?" Always with that condescending smile, as if she were doing me a favor by talking to me. I remembered the time she showed up at the office wearing a fur coat in the middle of summer, just to show she could. She spent an entire hour giving orders to the cleaning crew to rearrange the potted plants because they didn't match the energy of the environment. Energy. The woman sounded like an Instagram coach. Richard wasn't like that when we started. In 2002, he was just a programmer with an idea and zero credibility in the market. The company operated out of his basement, with 3 old computers and a dream too big for the resources he had. "Marco, you're the only one who can save us," he said that August afternoon. We were sitting in a dingy diner, sharing a hamburger because that was all he could afford. "I need someone to sign the lease for the new office." The banks laughed in my face. My name is burned after that startup went bankrupt. I was 31 years old, fresh out of another job where I was fired for cost cutting. I knew Richard from college. I knew he was brilliant even if he was a little irresponsible with money. When he offered me an informal partnership and a share of future profits, I accepted. I was the one who negotiated that first lease. $800 a month for a space that is now worth $15,000. I put my name, my social security number, my life as collateral. Richard promised that as soon as the company grew, we would transfer everything to the company's name. It never happened. In the early years, it was just the 5 of us. I did everything: sales, technical support, cleaning, basic accounting. I stayed until midnight solving server problems. I worked weekends, holidays, birthdays. My ex-wife left me in 2005, saying that I loved that company more than her. Maybe she was right. In 2007, we got our first big contract. A management system for a pharmacy chain. The payment allowed Richard to hire more programmers and rent an entire floor. I was still living in the same small apartment, driving the same 1998 car. "Marco, you're my right-hand man," Richard would say when things got tough. "I don't know what I'd do without you." During the crisis of 2008, when we almost lost everything, I was the one who renegotiated with suppliers, convinced employees to accept temporary pay cuts, and kept the company running while Richard was depressed. But after 2010, when the company really took off, Richard started to change. Expensive suits, imported cars, lunches at restaurants that charged $50 a plate. And me? I was still in the same cramped office, solving the same old problems. When he met Brenda in 2021, the transformation was complete. Suddenly, my opinion didn't matter anymore. Important decisions were made in executive meetings that I wasn't invited to. My office was moved to a smaller space because Brenda wanted to turn that area into a meditation room. A meditation room. In a technology company. In recent months, she has started showing up more often. Always with some revolutionary idea she read in a trend magazine. "Marco, I read about this thing called corporate feng shui. Could you rearrange all the furniture to improve the energy flow?" Or, "Marco, I think we should only hire young people from now on. New energy, you know? Older people bring heavy vibes to the environment." Heavy vibes. At 51, I had become a heavy vibe. The last straw came last week. I walked into the office and found my desk turned upside down. Brenda had decided to feng shui my space without telling me. 22 years of organized documents had been thrown into boxes haphazardly. "Marco, honey, you need to get rid of that accumulated energy," she said, admiring the chaos she had created. "Old papers trap negative energy." I did a complete energy cleanse. Energy cleanse. She had thrown away reports, old contracts, notes that took me years to organize. When I protested, she said I was being resistant to change. That's when Richard showed up, saw my indignant face, and simply shrugged. "Marco, Maybe it's time to modernize. Brenda is right about organization. At that moment, I knew I had lost not only a boss, but a friend. The man I had saved from bankruptcy in 2002 was now standing next to a woman he had known for less than 3 years. Now, sitting in that empty parking lot, I took out my cell phone and opened my contacts. I scrolled until I found the name I was looking for, Williams & Associates, a law firm specializing in business law. Lenny Williams had been my college classmate. He was a competent lawyer, discreet, and had an excellent memory for legal details. If anyone could help me understand exactly what my legal position was in this mess, it was him. Lenny? It's Marco. I need to talk to you about a complicated situation. Marco. Man, it's been a long time. How are you? You sound strange. I just got fired. After 22 years. And there are some things about the contracts I need to clarify urgently. There was a pause. Lenny knew my history. He knew I wasn't the type to cause trouble. Can you come over now? I'll cancel my afternoon meetings. As I drove to Lenny's office, a memory came back with full force. Richard, 3 years ago, drunk at a company party, pulling me aside. Marco, man, you're like the father of this company, you know? Without you, none of this would exist. When I die, you'll inherit all of this. At the time, I thought it was just alcohol talking. Now I realized that it was perhaps the only time he had ever told me the truth about what I really meant to that company. Too bad he had chosen to forget that truth when he married a woman who saw people like me as obstacles to her fantasies of power. But if they thought I was just going to disappear after 2 decades of building that up, they were sorely mistaken. Some secrets, when revealed at the right time, can bring down entire empires. And I had a few that neither Richard nor his little princess knew existed. Lenny Williams' office was on the 12th floor of a corporate building that smelled of new carpet and old ambition. Lenny hadn't changed much since college. He still wore thick-rimmed glasses and still had a habit of drumming his fingers when he was thinking. Marco, man, sit down. He pointed to a leather armchair that cost more than my first car. Tell me everything from the beginning. I spent 40 minutes explaining the details. The humiliating firing, Brenda assuming authority she didn't have, Richard being too cowardly to show up. When I got to the part about the lease, Lenny stopped drumming his fingers. Wait. Is the lease still in his name? Since 2002. Richard never transferred it because he never needed to. I always renewed it, always took care of everything. Lenny grabbed a notepad and began writing furiously. And when was the last renewal? August 1st. But Marco. I stopped, feeling a chill in my stomach. August 1st was the day before yesterday. He looked up, and for the first time since I walked in, he smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a lawyer who just found gold buried in his neighbor's backyard. Marco, are you telling me they missed the renewal deadline? And the contract is expired? Apparently, yes. Lenny stood up and went to a file cabinet. He returned with a thick folder labeled Commercial Real Estate Law Quick Reference. He flipped through a few pages and stopped at a section highlighted in yellow. According to state law, when a commercial lease expires without formal renewal, the tenant has 72 hours to vacate or negotiate a new agreement. If they fail to do so, they are in trespass. Trespass. The words had a beautiful weight to them. But they can renew now, right? Even if they're late. They can try. But, Lenny smiled again, since you're the original tenant, you have the right to accept or refuse the renewal. And you have the right of first refusal to negotiate a new lease with the landlord. I felt something strange in my chest. It was as if dozens of small acts of revenge that I never had the courage to carry out were coming together as one. Lenny, what are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just explaining your legal rights. He closed the folder and looked at me directly. The decision is yours. I left Lenny's office with a copy of the original contract and a list of phone numbers: building management, a law firm specializing in evictions, a commercial moving company. Just in case, Lenny had said. I couldn't go straight home. I drove around town, processing everything. 22 years building that company, and they threw me out like I was a piece of broken furniture. Brenda Morrison, who never worked a day in her life, decided my energy didn't fit with the new direction. My energy. The energy that kept the lights on when they couldn't pay the bills. The energy that worked weekends to meet impossible deadlines. The energy that saved the company from 3 different bankruptcies. I stopped at a gas station and bought a terrible cup of coffee just to have time to think. That's when my phone rang. Richard. Marco, man, where are you? Brenda said you had a talk today. Talk. As if it were a friendly discussion about the weather. I'm processing the news, Richard. Look, I know it was kind of abrupt, but you understand, right? The company is growing, we need new blood, young energy. Young energy. The same shit Brenda had said. Richard, can I ask you a question? Sure, man. Go ahead. Do you remember who signed the company's first lease? There was a pause. Oh, it was you, wasn't it? In the early years, when my credit was bad. And do you remember when we transferred the lease to the company's name? Another pause, longer this time. Marco, where are you going with this? Just curious. So, do you remember? I assume it was transferred at some point. Why do you ask? I assumed. Of course he assumed. Richard always assumed that other people would take care of the details while he focused on the big picture. 20 years ago, it was charming. Now, it was negligence. No big deal. Just checking some bureaucratic details. Okay, man. And Marco? No hard feelings, okay? It's just business. Business. He ended the call before I could respond. I sat in the car for another 20 minutes, watching the gas station. People coming and going, minding their business, with no idea that someone's life could change completely on a Thursday afternoon. That's when I made my decision. I wasn't going to tell Richard about the expired contract. I wasn't going to send a polite email explaining the situation. I wasn't going to be the dumb employee who solves problems even after being humiliated. They wanted to get rid of my energy? Fine. Now they'd see what happens when that energy stops working for them. I called Lenny. It's Marco. Can you set up a meeting with the building manager first thing tomorrow morning? I can. Are you sure, man? This is going to create a huge mess. Lenny, they created the mess when they decided that 22 years of loyalty was worth 3 months severance. I see. And Marco? You need to be prepared for the consequences. They're not going to take this lying down. Let them scream. I want to see if their youthful energy can handle a commercial eviction. I hung up and drove home for the first time in 22 years, feeling like I was in control of the situation. Richard and Brenda thought they had gotten rid of a problem. In fact, they had just awakened one that had been dormant for decades. That night, I organized all the documents I had saved over the years. Contracts, emails, receipts, notes. 2 decades of corporate history that they assumed had disappeared along with me. When I finished, it was 2 in the morning. I made some coffee and sat on the porch, looking at the city lights. Somewhere down there, Richard was probably sleeping peacefully, dreaming of IPOs and mergers. Brenda was planning the office's next energetic reorganization. Neither of them had any idea that in less than 72 hours, they would be discovering what it really means to do business. And this time, I wouldn't be there to solve their problem. On the contrary, I would be the problem. The meeting with Margaret Fernandez, the commercial complex administrator, was scheduled for 8 in the morning at a discreet coffee shop 3 blocks from the office. Margaret was a 60-year-old woman with gray hair tied back in an impeccable bun, who had been managing commercial properties for over 30 years. Marco, I must confess that I was surprised by your call, she said, stirring the sugar in her coffee. I didn't know the contract was still in your name. I placed the folder with all the documents on the table. Margaret, do you remember how hard it was to get that space in 2002? She smiled, a little nostalgic. Of course I remember. You were desperate. You said it was the company's last chance. I took pity on you and accepted below market value. And since then, I've always paid on time, always kept the space in perfect condition. Always. You've been one of the best tenants I've ever had. She picked up the documents and began leafing through them. But Marco, this is going to create a huge problem. They're going to be furious. Margaret, legally, what's my position? She sighed, adjusted her glasses, and reread a few passages. Technically, you have every right. The lease has expired, there has been no formal renewal, and you are the tenant of record. You can terminate or transfer to another tenant. And if I wanted to do it quickly? With the proper documentation? 72 hours notice. But Marco, are you sure? 22 years of a relationship. 22 years that they discarded on a Thursday afternoon. Margaret nodded slowly. I see. Do you already have a new tenant in mind? I smiled for the first time in days. Yes. A green tech startup called EcoFlow Solutions. They offered 40% above the current value. Her eyes widened. 40%? Marco, that's an excellent deal for all of us. I left the coffee shop with a new contract signed and a date, Monday noon. In 72 hours, Richard Morrison would have a surprise he would remember for the rest of his life. Over the weekend, I organized my entire plan. It wasn't just about kicking them out of the office. It was about doing them justice in a way that would make them understand the real value of what they had lost. I called some old contacts. Jessica Torres at TechCrunch, who always covered emerging startups. David Kim, an angel investor who had known Richard since the early years. Sarah Mitchell, an accountant who had access to the financial records of several companies in the industry. Jessica, this is Marco Silva. I have an interesting story about corporate negligence that might interest you. Sarah, I need to confirm some information about corporate property transfers. Do you have time for coffee? David, did you know that TechFlow Morrison never officially transferred the lease to the company's name? Each call was a piece of the puzzle. I didn't want to just dump it all on them. I wanted the whole world to know how they treated loyal employees. On Sunday, I got an unexpected call. Richard. Marco, man, how's it going? Brenda said you left in a bit of a huff on Thursday. A huff. As if it were an argument about where to have lunch. I'm processing the changes, Richard. Look, I know it was abrupt, but you understand how the market is, right? We need to adapt or die. Maybe this is an opportunity for you to explore new horizons. New horizons. At 51, after 2 decades building his company. Richard, can I ask you a personal question? Sure, man. We've always been close. Does Brenda really have the authority to fire employees? There was a pause. Well, she's been a valuable consultant. She brings a fresh perspective. A fresh perspective on human resources? Marco, where are you going with this? Just curious. I just want to understand the new company structure. Look, man, I know it may seem strange, but Brenda has an MBA in management. She understands business. MBA in management. Lenny had told me that her MBA was from an online university that had closed due to academic fraud in 2019. I see. Richard, one more question. Have you thought about moving the office? Maybe something more modern. Why? That place is perfect. Great location, low price. Why would I move? Just curious. The lease must be coming up soon. Oh, that's no problem. You've always taken care of those things. Assume everything is automatically renewed. Automatically renewed. Of course he assumed. Right. Well, I'm sure everything will work out. Exactly. And Marco? No hard feelings. You've always been family to me. Family. Funny how family becomes strange when it no longer serves his interests. I hung up and finished preparing the last details. Jessica from TechCrunch confirmed that she would publish the article on Tuesday morning. Sarah obtained documentation on financial irregularities that Brenda had been implementing. David agreed to make some strategic calls to investors. If you've been following this journey of a loyal employee who discovered his true value after being discarded, subscribe to the channel to see how this corporate justice story unfolds in the coming days. On Monday morning, I put on my best suit. The same one I wore for important presentations in the early years of the company. It was a little tight, but it still fit. I wanted to look impeccable for what was to come. At 10 in the morning, I got a call from Margaret. Marco, the papers are ready. The bailiff will deliver the notice at 11:30. Margaret, are you sure everything is legal? Absolutely. I consulted 3 different lawyers. His rights are unquestionable. At 11:15, I parked across the street, with a perfect view of the building's entrance. I wanted to see Richard's face when he received the eviction notice. The officer arrived on time. A tall man in uniform, carrying a brown leather briefcase. He went straight up to the 10th floor. 15 minutes later, my phone rang. Richard. Marco. What the hell is this eviction? Her voice was 3 octaves higher than normal. Calm down, Richard. What are you talking about? A bailiff just delivered a notice. It says we have 72 hours to vacate. That's strange. Didn't you renew the lease? What lease? You always took care of that. Richard, I was fired on Thursday, remember? I'm no longer responsible for these things. Total silence. I could almost hear the gears breaking in his head. Marco, is the lease still in your name? It was. Until today. Until today? What does that mean? It means you have 72 hours to find a new office. The space has already been rented to another company. You can't do that. This is sabotage. Richard, I was laid off due to organizational restructuring. Remember? Your wife said my energy didn't fit with the new direction of the company. Marco, are you crazy? This will destroy the company. No, Richard. This will show what happens when you treat loyal people like disposable trash. We can talk. I can reverse the fire. Too late. The new tenant has already signed the lease. EcoFlow Solutions. They move in Thursday. Who the hell is EcoFlow Solutions? A company that values experienced employees. They offered me the position of Director of Operations. The phone went dead. Richard had probably thrown it against the wall. I sat in my car, watching the frantic activity in the building. People were running, carrying boxes, gesticulating desperately. 22 years of loyalty had taught me a valuable lesson: never blindly trust those who have power over your life. But the last 4 days had taught me something even more important: sometimes you have more power than you realize. And when to use that power is a matter of perfect timing. On Tuesday morning, I arrived at the EcoFlow Solutions office at 8 o'clock. Not as a visiting employee, but as the Director of Operations for a company that was about to move into one of the most coveted addresses in the city. Amanda Chun, EcoFlow's founder, was a 35-year-old woman who had built her company from the ground up. Unlike Brenda Morrison, she knew the value of experienced employees. Marco, are you sure you want to do this? She asked as we signed the last documents. It's going to be a war. Amanda, some wars need to be fought. And this one is mine. At 9:15, I got the first call of the day. Richard, obviously. Marco, for God's sake, you can't do this. It's my company. It was your company, Richard. When you fired me, you broke the last tie that connected me to her. I didn't fire you. It was Brenda. And where were you when your wife decided to fire a 22-year-old employee? Playing golf. Silence. Richard, you taught me something important over the years. Business is business. Nothing personal. Marco, I can reinstate you. With a raise. With profit sharing. Too late. The new tenant moves in tomorrow. I hung up and smiled. It was the first time I had felt in control in years. At 10 o'clock, Margaret called me. Marco, they offered me 5 times the current rent to cancel the contract with EcoFlow. And I told them that business is business. Signed contracts are sacred. At 11 in the morning, my phone rang again. Unknown number. Hello. Marco Silva. A nervous female voice. Yes. This is Brenda Morrison. We need to talk. That was interesting. The little princess finally decided to talk to me directly. About what, Brenda? About this whole situation. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. As if firing someone after 22 years was a miscommunication. There was no misunderstanding. You were very clear on Thursday. My energy didn't fit with the new direction of the company. Marco, maybe I was hasty. Hasty. As if ruining someone's life was a matter of timing. Brenda, can I ask you a question? Sure. How many years did you work in business management before you decided to fire employees? Long pause. I have an MBA in management. From what university? Another pause. That's not relevant. Of course it is. Because my research shows that your university closed down for academic fraud in 2019. Total silence. Marco, you can't. I can't what? Exercise my legal rights? Protect my interests after being fired without just cause. This will destroy the company. No, Brenda. This will teach you what happens when you treat experienced people like disposable trash. I hung up before she could respond. At 2 in the afternoon, I was having a quiet lunch when I saw Richard walk into the restaurant. He looked 10 years older than he had the week before. His hair was messy, he had dark circles under his eyes, and his suit was wrinkled. He approached my table uninvited. Marco, please. Let's settle this like grown men. Sit down, Richard. He sat down, breathing heavily. You want to destroy 20 years of work because of a fight with my wife? It's not a fight, Richard. It's a business lesson. What lesson? You're crazy. The lesson is simple: never underestimate the employee who keeps your company running. I took out my phone and showed him a photo. It was the eviction notice, taped to the office door. Did you see this? He nodded, devastated. Do you know who took this photo? No. Jessica Torres, from TechCrunch. The article comes out tomorrow. Negligent CEO loses company headquarters for failing to renew lease. It's going to be interesting. His face went white. Marco, don't do this. Richard, I spent 22 years building that company. 22 years waking up early, working weekends, solving problems you didn't even know existed. I know you were important. Important? Important. My voice rose for the first time. Richard, I was that company. While you were in meetings talking about strategic vision, I was paying suppliers, negotiating contracts, keeping employees motivated. Marco, I can make it up to you. With what money? Because according to my source at the bank, you have 3 days of cash reserves. He looked at me, confused. How do you know that? I smiled. Sarah Mitchell, your former accountant. You know, the one Brenda fired last month because she didn't fit in with the company's youthful energy. She gave me some interesting information about recent expenses. Richard swallowed hard. What data? $15,000 on feng shui consulting. $22,000 on energy alignment retreats. $8,000 on crystals for corporate environment harmonization. With every number I said, his face grew paler. How did you get this information? Richard, you fired the wrong person. Sarah always had access to the financial records. And do you know what we found when we looked at the last 6 months? What? Your dear wife spent more on esoteric nonsense than the company earned in the last quarter. He hung his head in defeat. Marco, tell me what you want. Anything. I already got what I wanted, Richard. What was that? Justice. At that moment, my phone rang. Amanda from EcoFlow. Marco, the movers are here. Do you want to come see? I'm on my way. I got up from my desk and grabbed my briefcase. Richard, it's been a pleasure working with you. For 22 years. Marco, wait. By the way, I said, turning around one last time. Brenda tried to bribe me this morning. She offered me $50,000 to drop the eviction. And I told her she should have thought about that before messing with a person who knows all the company's secrets. What secrets? I smiled, the most genuine smile I'd had in years. Richard, do you really think that in 22 years I haven't learned where all the skeletons are buried? I left the restaurant, leaving him sitting alone, probably calculating how many other problems he was about to face. As I drove to the building, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Richard, Brenda, lawyers, desperate company employees. I let them all ring. When I arrived at the office, I found the most satisfying scene I had seen in 22 years. TechFlow Morrison moving trucks loading furniture through the service entrance, while EcoFlow trucks unloaded equipment through the main entrance. It was like watching a changing of the guard in real time. Margaret saw me arrive and waved. Marco, they tried to sue me. They said the contract was invalid. And my lawyer laughed so hard he almost fell off his chair. That's when I saw Brenda coming out of the elevator, crying, carrying a cardboard box. She saw me and stopped. Marco, please. Brenda, you said my energy didn't fit in with the company. You were right. My energy is too good for a place run by people like you. She walked past me without saying another word. 5 minutes later, Richard appeared. He looked like a broken man. Marco, you won. Are you happy? Richard, this was never about winning or losing. It was about respect. And now? We're going to lose everything. No, Richard. You're going to learn. He walked away, head down. At 6 o'clock in the evening, I was sitting in my new office on the 10th floor, overlooking the entire city. Amanda knocked on the door. Marco, how do you feel? Like I'm finally where I belong. And TechFlow Morrison? I heard they got a temporary space in a co-working office. 10 people sharing 2 desks. She laughed. Poetic justice. No, Amanda. This is just the beginning. Because tomorrow, Jessica from TechCrunch would publish a story that would forever change how the world views corporate negligence and disrespect for loyal employees. And on Friday, he had a meeting scheduled with 3 investors who were very interested in hearing the full story behind TechFlow Morrison's downfall. They had no idea what was coming. But I did. And this time, I was in charge. On Thursday morning, Jessica Torres' article was on the front page of TechCrunch, how a negligent CEO lost his company's headquarters by underestimating a loyal employee. The article detailed everything: the 22 years of dedication, the humiliating dismissal by his unqualified wife, the discovery of the expired lease, and the legal eviction that put a promising startup out on the street. Within 2 hours, the story went viral. LinkedIn, Twitter, Reddit. Everyone was talking about the perfect corporate revenge. Richard Morrison became a symbol of everything that was wrong with modern corporate culture. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Job offers, interview invitations, messages of support from employees who had been through similar situations. Marco, you've become a hero, said Amanda, walking into my office with a cup of coffee and a huge smile. Through the window, I could see the movement at the building's entrance. EcoFlow customers arriving for meetings, employees entering with positive energy, a totally different atmosphere from the toxicity that had prevailed before. On Friday, I received an unexpected call. Richard. Marco. I wanted to apologize. His voice was broken, tired. You were right. About everything. Brenda made me lose perspective. I lost not only the company, but a friend of 22 years. Richard, you lost much more than that. You lost the trust of investors, employees, partners. You lost your reputation. I know. We're living at Brenda's mother's house. She's already talking about divorce. Investors have canceled all meetings. I didn't feel any pleasure hearing this. Just a quiet sadness for the waste of everything we had built together. Richard, you can rebuild. But this time, remember what really matters. People. The right people. The ones who stick with you when the going gets tough. 2 weeks later, I was sitting at a restaurant table with 3 investors interested in EcoFlow solutions. Amanda had arranged a meeting that would change the future of the company. Marco, said Patricia Weinstein, one of Silicon Valley's most respected investors, your story is being talked about in every investment circle. You've proven something rare, that loyalty and competence go hand in hand. And that underestimating experienced employees is the most expensive mistake a company can make, added David Chun, another investor. We closed a $5 million round of investment. EcoFlow Solutions was officially on the map of promising startups in the city. That night, walking through the downtown streets, I passed the old building. The TechFlow Morrison sign had been removed. In its place was a temporary sign, EcoFlow Solutions, green technology for a sustainable future. I stopped for a moment, remembering all the years I had dedicated to that place. The late nights working, the weekends solving problems, the genuine passion for building something important. I felt no anger or bitterness. I felt gratitude. Gratitude for learning that my value didn't depend on other people's recognition. That competence and loyalty are qualities that never go out of style. And that sometimes getting fired is the best gift you can receive. 3 months later, I heard that Richard had landed a job as a programmer at a small startup. Basic salary, no special benefits, working for someone his age who valued experience. Brenda? She moved to Los Angeles, trying to become a wellness influencer. Last I heard, she had 50 followers and was selling energized crystals at a hippie fair. Life has an interesting way of correcting injustices. Today, as COO of EcoFlow Solutions, I've learned that true revenge isn't destroying those who hurt you. It's building something so extraordinary that the previous injustice becomes irrelevant. If this story of overcoming adversity and poetic justice has touched you, subscribe to the channel to discover more stories of people who turned humiliation into victory and betrayal into triumph. Because in the end, they tried to discard me as if I were replaceable. They discovered that some people are irreplaceable. And when you mess with one of them, you're not just losing an employee. You're losing the future.